El moderador está.
Sí. Ok, bienvenidos a toda la comunidad de los cursos en línea de la CINSAE, cuyo titular es el doctor Gustavo Reyes Terán. El día de hoy damos el siguiente paso, nuestro primer foro, el primer webinar de carácter internacional. The importance of early treatment of COVID-19, the experience of Bolonia, Italy. Tenemos la presencia del profesor Pierluigi Viale y el día de hoy el doctor Simón Cagua, director de los Institutos Nacionales de la Ciudad de México, será nuestro coordinador del webinar. Bienvenidos todos. La temática, el webinar se va a llevar a cabo en inglés. English is going to be the official language in this discussion, in this webinar. Ustedes pueden escribir las preguntas o comentarios directamente, como ya lo hemos venido haciendo en los webinars de los cursos en línea. Si existe algún comentario, tanto en YouTube como directamente en la videoconferencia, nosotros pasaremos la pregunta. Y doy la bienvenida al doctor Simón Cagua Karasik. Hola, doctor.
Buenos días a todos, bienvenidos. Welcome everybody. I'm going to give these welcome words in English. On behalf of Dr. Gustavo Reyes Terán, the Commissioner of the National Institutes of Health here in Mexico, it is my pleasure to be here to welcome everybody, Mr. Ambassador Luigi de Chaira, Bernardo Aguilar Calvo, General Director for Europe in the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Mexico, Consul Maria Teresa Cerón, Cultural Attaché in the Mexican Embassy in Mexico, and to all the people that are gathering here to hear this conference. It is for us very important to have this scientific academic interaction, for us to learn from the experience that others have before us. It is very important. As you can see, the purpose of today's interaction, the importance of early treatment for COVID-19, the experience of Bologna, Italy, it's going to be very enriching for all of us. I am pleased to be here to welcome you all, and let's continue with the order of the day. I'm sure this is going to be a most enriching experience for all of us. Thank you.
Now, Ambassador Luigi de Chiara, welcome.
Webinar on the experience of the COVID in Italy. Together with the Mexican Embassy in Rome, we are trying to activate several channels of communication and collaboration between our two countries, especially since Italy has been an example of it was early hit by the pandemic and was an example in fighting the pandemic, and it's now an example in trying to go back to a new normality. I would like also to thank Professor Simón Cagua de la Coordinación de Institutos de Salud de México for having organized the wide participation on the Mexican side. Let me thank also Bernardo, dear friend and colleague, Bernardo Aguilar, Director General for Europe at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Mexico City, and also Maria Teresa Cerón, who is following and contributing from the Mexican Embassy in Rome. As I said before, the overall objective of these activities is share experiences and share protocols, both sanitary protocols, but also other kind of protocols that allow us to try to overcome this crisis. We will organize other webinars on other aspects of the sanitary crisis on the 12th, on the 16th, and the 24th of June. These are not the only activities that we are putting forward in our times. The solidarity and the friendship between two countries becomes more evident. We were very happy last week to celebrate the Italian National Day with a symbolic event that was the delivery to the CONACYT, which is the Central Investigation Institute Federal Investigation Institute in Mexico, of a prototype of a ventilator that was elaborated open source by Scuderia Ferrari, the renowned firm that builds automobiles and participates in Formula One races, and the Italian Institute of Technology in Genoa. The prototype and the project of the ventilator were put at disposal of the federal institutions in Mexico to be freely exploited here in Mexico, allow the construction of new ventilators and fully save new lives. There are other, Mexico and Italy have a very strong ties also in the economic sector. There is a strong presence of Italian companies in Mexico that are trying to give their contribution to support both the authorities, especially at local level, and the population to overcome the crisis. I'll just take one example. In the next few days, Saipem, which is a well-known Italian engineering company, will donate 600,000 masks to the government of the city of Mexico City as a sign of solidarity, since they work here since many years now. We are already thinking about the future when hopefully the crisis will be overtaken, the health crisis will be overtaken, and there will be the need to reactivate the economy. The embassy, together with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Rome and the Institute of External Trade, organized last week a webinar on doing business in Mexico. And we recorded the participation of more than 700 companies from Italy. These are just a few examples of what we are doing. We will keep on working to try to strengthen cooperation between Italy and Mexico in this very harsh crisis. But I don't want to take any more time. So thank again to all the participants, and I wish we will have a very interesting webinar. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Grazie, Professor Viale.
Now we activate the microphone of the General Director for Europe in the Mexican Ministry, Bernardo Aguilar Calvo.
Thank you, Pavel. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to be present in this webinar. Thank you, Dr. Simon Kawa, for the organization, Ambassador Luis de Chiara. It's a pleasure to see you again. Counselor Maria Teresa Cerón, it's a pleasure too. And of course, we want to bring a greeting from our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Marcelo Ebrard, to everybody. Thank you, Professor Pierluigi Viale, for sharing with us your knowledge. This is a very difficult moment for all the people in the world, and it is very important to have this kind of collaboration. If we know more about COVID in this moment is because Italy and the Italian people, and especially the Italian scientists, it's very important for us to have this experience, and we want to say thank you to you for this webinar. I don't want to take more time because I am sure that everybody wants to listen Professor Pierluigi Viale. So thank you again, and it's all. Thank you.
Okay, now we open the microphone of the Consular Maite Cerón, Cultural Attaché in the Mexican Embassy.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank, on the name of the Ambassador of Mexico in Italy, Carlos Garcia de Alba, and to the Embassy of Italy in Mexico to organize this conference, and especially to the Ambassador Luigi de Chiara and the Scientific Attaché Emilia Giorgetti, and Mr. Simon Kawa of the Commission of National Institute of Health and High Specialties Hospitals, and especially the contribution of the Pierluigi Viale of the Department of Medical and Surgical Science of the University of Bologna. This is one of the many examples of Italy willingness to collaborate to Mexico in the many fields of science, especially in this moment of tragedy in the face of the COVID pandemic. Italy, as well as Ambassador has said, Ambassador de Chiara has said, this is one of the many examples, and especially because Italy has donated medical equipment and shared his experience. The knowledge of the Dr. Viale in infection disease and clinical hematology will be a great contribution for Mexican health institutions. Thank you very much for this grateful time for our doctors and for the generosity of Italy. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we are ready. Dr. Viale, if you could share your screen with us in order to begin this lecture, this webinar.
Thank you very much. I hope you can see the slides. First of all, thank you very much for your kind invitation. I am more than proud of your consideration. I'm not an expert in COVID-19 infection because a true expert in this disease doesn't exist around the world. But I am a medical doctor working in the first European country attacked by one of the worst nightmares of anyone, a country actually affected by more than 235,000 virologically confirmed cases with more than 33,000 deaths. So simply, I would like to tell you our story. The first case the first Italian case occurred in February the 20th in South Lombardia, an area closer to the Emilia-Romagna district, the main town of which is Bolonia, where I work, and where to date we account for 5,000 cases of confirmed COVID disease with 500 deaths. In Bologna, the first case occurred in the last day of February, while in the west area the fire had already started. Therefore, on March 2, when the overall number of Italian cases were around 2,000, we decided to dedicate the ID unit as a 30-bed COVID unit, reserving 15 ICU beds for the most severe cases. This happened on February the 2nd. 2 weeks later, on March 18, while Italian cases has reached the value of 42,000 cases, we were just arrived to 3,000 dedicated COVID beds in general wards, plus 150 ICU beds, all COVID dedicated, all full of patients. Those were desperate days. Hundreds of new patients in the emergency departments of our town, 20% of them admitted with a severe condition, often needing an immediate ICU admission for intensive ventilatory support, PPI shortage, a complete uncertainty and several controversies about treatment strategy, a significant number of infections in the healthcare works, in the healthcare workers, the first steering of the long-term facilities dramas, and personal and social tears. Very difficult days. I had the clear feeling of living a science fiction film, like War of the Worlds, where Tom Cruise fought against a quite unbeatable enemy. However, on March 28, in the middle of the storm, 92,000 cases in Italy, our lives changed. This paper, published during those days, described perfectly what has happened in Lombardia, one of the richest Italian districts with one of the best healthcare system, quite good as the healthcare system of Emilia-Romagna district. And this paper explained perfectly the dramatic impact of pandemia in northern Italy. 1,091 cases of patients admitted to ICU, and only 16 of them discharged on March 28, and more than 50% of patients still admitted in the ICU. A situation near the fall of the healthcare system. This paper describes the drama, but also demonstrates that hundreds of ICU beds and ventilators perched inside the forts represented by the hospital probably don't represent the best solution for the disease management. This is the first lesson we have learned, and therefore, on March 28, after 4 weeks perched inside the fort waiting for patients, on March 28, we completely changed our strategy, moving from a waiting strategy to an early catching strategy. What has happened from March 28? Starting from the observation that the sickest patients arrived to our hospitals with a history of 7 to 14 days of fever over 38, simply we changed the key message from, if you have fever, take paracetamol and wait, calling us if the fever doesn't disappear. We changed the message to, if you have fever, don't worry, we are going to catch up you. Thanks to the support of general practitioners, we started a sort of febrile patients hunting based on an on-call triage. The practitioners were able to define 4 different levels of priority: emergency, urgency, worrisome, stable patients, with 4 different modalities to access and different timing of access to our emergency department, or fast-track checkpoint that we implemented around the town, around the area in every hospital or day service programs. It was a huge engagement involving infectivologists, pneumologists, cardiologists, emergency department, medical doctors, but we assisted during this time to a progressive decrease in ICU admission. This is our the decision tree of our intervention: checkpoint, clinical, biological, instrumental evaluation by a multidisciplinary team for any probable possible case based on clinical features, virological screening, and a decision between home management of hospital admission. Home management were based on hydroxychloroquine administration after cardiological screening, and home isolation and on-call follow-up. For hospital-admitted patients, we started with a therapy with an antiretroviral, but we moved to remdesivir or immunomodulators drugs, plus low molecular weight heparin, plus, when needed, oxygen. This is our intervention, and during the most dramatic phase of the disease, for example, on April 13, when in Italy there were 160,000 cases, we relieved a significant drop in ICU admissions. The drop in ICU admission, the decrease in ICU admission directly from emergency department was related to a reduction of severe cases before the second phase of pandemic. In other terms, using an early catching strategy, we anticipated the natural evolution of the infection. And in the middle of April, the number of patients admitted in ICU, the number was very small, and we assisted to a complete decrease in this type of admission. And also, the rate of severe, moderate to severe cases admitted in general ward evolving toward respiratory failure also dropped, thanks to a timely and aggressive approach, both at home, both in the hospital. So the change on our management paradigm worked very well, and we were able to contain the evolution of the pandemic in our area at least 2-3 weeks before the natural evolution of the pandemic. Well, to better understand our therapeutic choice, I think that, and to introduce the second part of my presentation about the therapeutic resources, I think that a focus on the natural history and the pathogenesis of the disease should be done. SARS-CoV infect cells expressing the surface receptor angiotensin conversion enzyme 2, ACE2, and we have realized that the first site of COVID localization is nasal epithelium, because nasal epithelium expresses high levels of ACE2 enzyme. If native immunity is able to contain the viral reproduction, the infection can remain limited in this site, generating the asymptomatic infection. Not dangerous for the single individual, but as we know, extremely dangerous from a public health point of view, because the asymptomatic infected patients are considered the main source of infection for exposed people. The true number of asymptomatic infected patients is largely unknown, but we know that they take account of more than 70% of transmission, according to a model recently published on Science. If COVID overcomes nasal epithelium barrier, any organ expressing, any cell expressing ACE2 enzyme could be involved in this infection. This is a theory substantiated by the evidence of the multi-organ involvement during COVID disease. And the site of our body rich in angiotensin converting enzyme 2 are several, from pneumocyte in lung alveoli to endothelial cells, to kidney cells, brain stem and neural cortex cells, and the lower digestive tract epithelium. In fact, as the number of confirmed cases increases, we realized that this is not only a disease of the lung, but it is a multifaceted disease involving with a multi-organ involvement. So, although the lung is probably ground zero, the first target of the infection, COVID can extend to many organs, including the heart, blood vessels, kidney, gut, brain. We don't know if this multi-organ damage is related to a direct viral effect or to an immunopathogenic mechanism. What we have learned is that basically COVID disease entails two different pathogenic mechanisms strictly linked each to other. This is a very complicated slide. I tried to explain it in a few minutes. If you look to the right part of the slide, you can realize that when COVID infects cells expressing ACE2, the active replication and release of the virus cause, as usual, an host cell to undergo apoptosis and release the major associated molecular patterns. They are recognized by epithelial cells, alveolar macrophages, triggering a pro-inflammatory cytokine and chemokine activity. This protein attracts other monocytes, other macrophages, other T cells to the site of infection, promoting further inflammation and establishing a pro-inflammatory feedback loop. In a normal, healthy immune response, the right side of the slide, the initial inflammation attracts virus-specific T cells to the site of infection, where they can eliminate the infected cells before the virus spread. And in these individuals, neutralizing antibodies can block viral infection, and alveolar macrophages recognize neutralized viruses and apoptotic cells and clear all the field by phagocytosis. And together, this process leads to the clearance of the virus and minimal length damage, resulting finally in a clinical recovery. In a rate of patients, however, defective immune response, the left side of the slide, induce a pro-inflammatory feedback loop that may lead to further accumulation of immune cells in the lungs, causing overproduction of pro-inflammatory cytokines, with the start to damage the lung infrastructures. The resulting cytokine storm circulates to other organs, leading the multi-organ damage. In addition, not neutralizing antibodies are produced, and they can enhance the infection through the antibody-dependent enhancement mechanism, so exacerbating the organ damage. Therefore, this is a very famous slide. Therefore, in more severe cases, the disease is related to two different phases strictly linked to each other. The first is driven by virological replication, to which, after several days, follows the upregulated inflammatory response that enables the terrible cytokine storm with severe endothelial damage, activation of severe sepsis condition, arriving to the acute respiratory distress side. So two different diseases in the same disease, two different pathogenic mechanisms in the same disease. And the different expression of these two mechanisms results in a wide spectrum of clinical phenotypes, from asymptomatic patients to mild infection to severe infection to acute respiratory distress syndrome. 20 to 30% of patients have respiratory syndromes, sometimes mild, but able to evolve from mild to severe condition with different involvement of lung interstitium exactly in relationship with the level of upregulation immune responses. In these patients, moving toward more critical condition, fever, high level of fever is almost always present. This is the reason for our febrile patient hunting project. This is the reason because high febrile patients must be always considered at-risk patients, potentially critical patients. As you know very, very well, no proven effective therapies for COVID currently exist. However, the rapid expanding knowledge provides several so-called working hypotheses. But what I would like to emphasize is that is the value of a timely approach and a timely drug choice, because probably the different therapeutic options we have a different utility in relationship with the disease state. So one of the goal of research is to become able to catch up the right moment in which the patient move from the viral phase to the upregulated inflammatory response phase. Using our large database, we have extracted and validated a prediction rule able in our minds to identify the right moment in which the patient changes his condition and moves toward the immunomediated phase, with the aim to improve the right timing for therapeutic choice. In fact, for example, a too late administration of antivirals could be useless, while a too early administration of anti-inflammatory drugs could be detrimental for patient health. As you can see in this slide, the most important factors are not related to the respiratory condition, because the respiratory condition evolution is related to the age of the patients. So fever, lymphopenia, CRP increase, LDH increase work better than, for example, oxygenation. Because if you use only respiratory parameters, we can have we can realize too late the evolution of the patient, especially if the patient is a young patient able to resist the silent hypoxia of the infection. Talking about the right timing of treatment, we have learned another important lesson. Together with antivirals and anti-inflammatory therapy, the respiratory support, the right oxygen use is probably the best treatment we have to date. In other terms, oxygen probably is the best therapy if we are able to administer oxygen in the right way, in the right time of the disease progression. So catching early the patients and evaluating their respiratory condition and realizing an intervention of respiratory support early with a different stage of intervention, oxygen, CPAP, non-invasive ventilation, helped us to better control the evolution of the disease. Now, I believe that a brief overview on the drug use is due. These are the drugs we have used and we are using in the management of infection. Chloroquine, antiretrovirals, remdesivir, antiviral drug, a new drug, a new concept of therapy like anti-CBS, heparin, and all the drugs included in the definition of anti-inflammatory immunomodulate therapy. A couple of concepts about anti-CBS therapy. ABX 464 is a first-in-class clinical stage small molecule for oral administration that has to show strong anti-inflammatory effect in the model of inflammatory bowel diseases, and also it resulted able to prevent the replication of HIV virus. This drug binds to cap binding complex, and so it is able to drive a significant contemporary anti-inflammatory and antiviral effect. It has demonstrated safety and efficacy in a phase 2 clinical trial on ulcerative colitis. It could be a relevant option in HIV treatment, because in HIV treatment we have learned that controlling the viral replication and inflammation are pivotal to reach a better result. And today, an anti-COVID activity is postulated by in vitro studies, and a phase 2 studies is planning about COVID. And this study is of particular interest because, as opposed to the most anti-inflammatory drug studies, focused on severe cases. The ABIX 464 study will include patients in an early stage of disease, aged over 74 years, with diabetes, ischemic heart disease, high blood pressure. So the true patients we managed during these last 3 months. So because because of the drug convenient oral delivery, the study will recruit early stage non-hospitalized patients. And so it could be very useful also for residents in nursing homes, for example, which in our country, like in many other countries, have been hit hard by COVID. It is a very interesting option, in my opinion, worthy of our engagement. We are starting with, we will start to enroll patients as soon as possible if we will have new patients in the next future, hoping to not be able to do the study because the pandemic is finished. But talking about consolidate options, it is impossible not to talk about hydroxychloroquine, a drug surrounded by hope, hype, and politicization. We place trust in chloroquine because it has a distinct in vitro antiviral effect against several RNA viruses, and they can also act on the immune system through regulation of pro-inflammatory cytokines. At the beginning of the pandemic, we hoped that chloroquine could be the universal therapy for the infection. It was deeply studied during the SARS outbreak in 2006, but the research aborted like SARS outbreak aborted. We placed trust in chloroquine, but unfortunately, almost 2-3 big studies deem hopeless that hydroxychloroquine can treat or prevent COVID-19 infection. The first study came from the Recovery Network. This is a network active in the United Kingdom, testing several suggested treatments: lopinavir, ritonavir, low-dose dexamethasone, hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, tocilizumab, and the convalescent plasma. For every option, there is a study matching the drug with control arms. But on June the 5th, the COVID investigators announced the preliminary results about hydroxychloroquine. In a group of 1,050 patients, hospitalized patients, treated with hydroxychloroquine, 25% in the chloroquine arm had died after 28 days, compared with 23.5% in the group, the control group. So the author wrote this data convincingly rule out any meaningful mortality benefit. And they decided to end the study, to end this arm of the recovery network, promising to publish the full results. Obviously, we need to see the full data before a final judgment. For example, it is strange that about 25%, 1 in 4 patients died. 1 in 4 patients died, so a very high mortality in both arms, and this very high mortality rate suggests that they have enrolled patients too gravely ill when the treatment started. So, for example, a bias could be related with the fact that they enrolled the patient too late in the natural history of of the disease. My personal idea, for example, is that the right place in therapy for chloroquine is not the hospitalized patient, but that chloroquine could be a useful drug in the very early phases of the disease, while it is not useful for patients with a clinical condition just needing an hospital admission. In fact, we used chloroquine for home treatment in our strategy. But we cannot ignore the data of the literature. And this is another study, a relevant study, smaller, a logarithm less, 150 patients randomized between COVID and standard of care. That is nothing. That standard of care doesn't exist. The main outcome measure of this study was the negativization of nasopharyngeal swab. So this is a study designed for public health goal, not a single patient's healthy goal. Not to see if the patient improves, but to see if not to evaluate the clinical improvement, but to evaluate the virological clearance with the aim to accelerate the quarantine period, to reduce the quarantine period. Unfortunately, as you can see the study arrived to the same conclusion of the other study, no evidence of a significant advantage. On the contrary, in this retrospective study, including 550 critically ill patients, the fatality rate was significantly lower in chloroquine. This paper is published in a not relevant journal. It's not published on New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet, but during the last week, we have realized that also the most important journals can fail in the selection of paper for publication. This has to be the case of this huge observational study coming from an unusual toxicity of chloroquine, a study retracted by Lancet within less than 2 weeks. An incredible defeat for one of the most important medical journals. The study was retracted because the data was not true. And this study represents better than any other consideration the politicization, the political war around the use of chloroquine between Trump president and the WHO, World Health Organization. But for example, yesterday, another large paper was published from France authors evaluating 1,061 patients treated with hydroxychloroquine plus azithromycin, and they obtained a good clinical response, a good virological response with a low incidence of adverse events. I don't know. I am, in my experience, I did not examine. We didn't do one of the bias of our work during the 3 months of war we lived is the low number of randomized study we done. But we this is my personal idea, the level of stress of population, the level of urgency in the management of the pandemic hampered any opportunity to propose to patients a randomized study. It was impossible because our engagement, physical and psychical engagement, the level of stress of the entire population hampered completely the possibility to propose randomization to patients. So we made a war medicine, and we made also a war research. And at the end, we can refer only to retrospective evaluation like this. We have a large database with around 150 patients treated with chloroquine. I cannot refer you any data about efficacy. Also, my sensation is that the drug worked in early phase of the disease. But what I can affirm is that in a population with a good pre-treatment cardiological screening, the safety of the drug was absolutely good, satisfying, and the rate of severe heart-related adverse event was extremely low, is not trivial. So probably all the discussion, all the publication about toxicity of chloroquine in the retracted paper are related to a political position more than a true evidence about the data. The World Health Organization managed a trial similar to the UK trial, to the recovery trial, named Solidarity, and this is a trial enrolling patients in 5-arm prospective study, local standard of care, or remdesivir, or hydroxychloroquine, or lopinavir plus ritonavir, or lopinavir plus ritonavir plus interferon. And during 2 weeks ago, the hydroxychloroquine arm was stopped, but now it was readmitted in the trial. So we can wait the results of this large study endorsed by WHO. 2 other studies are ongoing in Norwegian and in Ireland. So I believe that for the next winter, when we expect the reappraisal of the infection, we could have a large amount of definitive data about chloroquine use as therapeutic choice. But hydroxychloroquine, because in vitro it seems able to prevent the penetration of the virus in the cells. Another advocated side of chloroquine utilization is prophylactic use. And but recently, results from this study aimed to evaluate the putative role of chloroquine in post-exposure prophylaxis, reached an unfavorable conclusion because after high risk of moderate risk exposure, chloroquine administered within 4 days after exposure doesn't prevent COVID infection. But the game is not over, and other studies on prophylaxis are ongoing, like this. That is a very interesting study enrolling healthcare workers, one of the most exposed categories. So the chloroquine war, the chloroquine game is still open. I would like to talk about remdesivir, another antiviral promising drug developed and already used against Ebola virus. And recently, preliminary reports from this large NIH study has been published. This is a very well-planned study, a randomized placebo-controlled trial in adults with evidence of lower respiratory tract involvement. The primary outcome was the time to recovery, defined by either discharge from the hospital or hospitalization only for infection control, for patients clinically healed but not just virologically healed. The evolution, the outcome, patient outcome was evaluated on the basis of the WHO category scale. This is a very interesting modality of define the different phenotype of the disease. The WHO category scale defines 7 levels of severity from symptomatic to critically ill patients. It is normally used in the more recent clinical trial. Well, patient outcome was evaluated, dynamically evaluated in this population, and the preliminary results from 1,059 patients with data available after randomization indicate that patients who received remdesivir had a median recovery time of 11 days as compared with 15 days in the placebo arm, with a significant, statistically significant difference. Regarding mortality, the mortality was lower in the remdesivir group, 70%, and then in the placebo group, 11.9%, but the difference was not significant. And while safety results were comparable. An interesting data, looking at this study, is the median number of days between symptoms onset and randomization. The median number of days was 9, too long time. And this could represent the Achilles heel of the study, because the delay in treatment starting could have hampered, penalized the true efficacy of remdesivir. However, the difference is significant, and this is the first drug with a statistically significant data about when compared to another option. The different remdesivir remained superior to placebo both in stage 5 and in stage 4 patients. Stage 5 patients are patients receiving oxygen. Stage 4 patients are patients that hospitalized but not receiving oxygen. And while the efficacy was not demonstrated in patients in the 7th stage, the more critical patient in invasive ventilation. And this confirmed that the number of patients in this arm was not trivial, around 200 patients. And this data confirmed that probably the enrollment started too late in the natural history of disease. I would like to see the remdesivir performance in early stages of disease, because the leitmotif is always the same. The earlier you are, the better could be the outcome. Another important study was published in the same period. And it worth attention because it is a randomized open-label trial involving subjects with oxygen saturation of 94 or less. Patients were randomized to receive 5 or 10 days of therapy, and the primary endpoint was clinical status on day 14, assessed with the same 7-point scale. No difference between the two arms was detected, although patients assigned to the 10 days group had a significant worse clinical status. So the conclusion we can draw from the two studies that remdesivir is the only drug with a significant, although modest advantage as compared with a control, and that probably 5-day course could be sufficient. Unfortunately, the PK/PD behavior of remdesivir needed an intravenous administration, and oral administration is not possible. But the company is working on aerosol administration of the drug, and if the aerosol administration works, it could represent probably to date we could affirm that remdesivir is the drug of choice for the viral stage of the disease. Another theoretically promising option is the convalescent plasma therapy. Although theoretically promising, its use remains investigational, and several potential harms are not completely evaluated or excluded. For example, the risk of transfusion-associated circulatory overload in critical patients, the problem related to the immunological storm related to the direct infusion of a substantial amount of complement protein and coagulation factors, and finally, the so-called antibody-dependent enhancement of mechanism of COVID disease. The last is of particular concern. You know how the antibody dependence mechanism works. It is well, for example, it is well known for the second episode of dengue fever. It is only hypothesized in a COVID infection, but it is of particular concern because it provides that an accessory mechanism of cell attack could exist together with the ACE2 mechanism. In other terms, the presence of antibodies in a low titer against COVID can represent a strategy for the COVID to attack the cell. Instead of ACE2 receptors, the virus seems able to use the Fc fraction of antibodies to attack the cells. I don't know. It is an hypothesis, but there are several papers discussing about it, and so probably we should consider the convalescent plasma infusion the starting of a history, of a story, not the end, because probably in the next months, the next year, we will have immunoglobulins, specialized immunoglobulins against spike receptors, or in the best way, monoclonal antibodies specifically directed against spike protein that represent the protein of the virus driving the attack to the cells. In Italy, during the last weeks, we were involved in a very depressing political battle around plasma therapy, not withstood by scientific data and supported by physicians without any citation on Scopus. To the point where the National Agency for Drug Management, AIFA, has decided to plan a national randomized study exactly to avoid dangerous head-on rushes. But inside this discussion last week, the first randomized trial has been published by Chinese scientists. This is a very interesting study because it tried to define also the quality of the plasma infused. In fact, only units with a high titer of neutralizing antibodies over 1.640 were used. The primary outcome of the study was time to clinical improvement within 24 hours, defined as patient discharged alive, or reduction of 2 points in the seventh disease severity scale. The overall result was disappointing because clinical improvement occurred in 51.9% of treated patients and in 43.1% the control group, with a not statistically significant difference. However, among patients with severe disease, the primary outcome occurred in 91.3 versus 68.2 in the control group, reaching a statistically differentiation. While among patients with light-treating disease, the difference was absolutely not reached. So, about the mortality, the 20 mortality, no significant difference were seen. 2015 versus 24%. The conclusion of the study is that among patients with severe or life-threatening COVID disease, convalescent plasma therapy added to standard therapy did not result in a statistically significant improvement in the time of clinical within 24 days. However, the design study planned an enrollment of 148 patients, but only 103 patients were randomized because the severe cases disappeared in one, and so the interpretation of this data is limited by early termination of the trial, which may have been underpowered to detect the clinically important difference. So also about plasma therapy, the game is not over, and we need other studies, more patients to reach a conclusion. Finally, a mention about heparin. The heparin use starts from a question derived from several clinical observations. A dangerous tendency to blood clotting, able to transform a mild case in a life-threatening emergency. We saw in several patients a dramatic incidence of thrombotic events, both in the lung and in other parts, in other sites. So we saw that both in managing the patient and during autopsy of critically patients. Of particular concern were the high incidence of pulmonary microthrombosis observed in these patients. Moreover, we know that in severe patients per kilo versus 1 milligram per kilo. In a patient with a normal weight, 4,000 versus 8,000 international units of heparin. In our retrospective report that we have submitted, we have the treatment with high dose of heparin resulted protective on the mortality. And this is a data quite similar to this recently published study in which advantage was detected. Heparin was associated to a lower mortality when the model was adjusted for age and gender with a significant odds. So we are waiting for the results of our ongoing study. It is a multi-site Italian study. We have enrolled to date and half of the requested sample size. I hope not to be able to finish the study because it would mean that the output is finished. As I have just said, we must continue to work in the perspective to have a second phase of infection during the next week. To close my presentation, a brief point about anti-inflammatory therapies. The number of molecules is very large, from steroid to inhibitors of interleukin 6 receptor, tocilizumab and Savinomax. Directly interleukin 6 inhibitors like cetuximab, interleukin 1 receptors inhibitors like canakinumab, anti-JAK inhibitors, and anti-complement molecules. We have developed an experience with tocilizumab. We treated together with our colleagues of the town of Modena, Reggio Emilia, close to Bolonia, 4,000 patients, and the mortality was significantly higher in the control group as opposed to the tocilizumab group. The results are encouraging. This is a retrospective evaluation, obviously, but we must accept the fact that more or less 30% of patients fail the tocilizumab therapy, and to date we don't have a clear knowledge of failure associated with that. We have developed also a very small but very favorable experience with cetuximab, a directly interleukin 6 inhibitors in patients failing tocilizumab. But finally, there is a pending question about anti-inflammatory drugs, because tocilizumab, cetuximab, canakinumab are very expensive drugs, and we had the problem of shortage, and the question is, are all the countries of the world able to pay the high cost of these drugs when we have a wonderful anti-inflammatory drugs named steroid? So about the steroid, there is another important discussion in the literature. Are they useful or not? The European and American ICU Society have taken a position against the use of steroids, almost with the exception of the most advanced phase of the disease, but they have a position against the use of steroids in the first stage of the disease because the risk to delay the viral clearance seems too high. But a clear demonstration of the danger doesn't exist, and a study comparing steroid use versus anti-interleukin-6 drugs is strongly needed. We planned this type of study, but today we don't have patients. For the future, this is an important item to be considered. Well, the time is running. This is a paramount of our town. With this last consideration, I closed my presentation. I am sorry I brought more doubts sometimes, but this is our real life today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much. Are you there, Dr. Cava?
Yes, I'm here. I would like to thank you very much, Professor Viale, for your wonderful presentations. You gave us an overlook of what you Yes, Dr. Viale, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. We appreciate very much sharing with us your experience. You live there a lot of things that are very similar to what we are living right now here in Mexico. And some of the information you gave us will really help us. We're now undergoing several clinical protocols with some of the interventions you mentioned. And I think working in those clinical trials to gather evidence of what could be an effective treatment that will be also safe for the patients is crucial at this moment. Thank you very much. I myself really enjoyed very much your talk, the information. I think it's very, very useful for all of us. Pavel, I think you have some questions you have gathered for Professor Viale.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. A final consideration: any country like Latin American countries arriving after us today has the obligation, the responsibility, the duty to build the evidence. You can learn by our mistakes, and because unfortunately to date you have patients, please try to help the scientific community to build the evidence. We desperately need evidence, clinical trials, well-done literature, because 3 months of war medicine and 3 months of discussion and sometimes are too much for me and for my colleagues.
Yes, and that's one thing that in the National Institutes of Health here in Mexico we are dealing very seriously. We think that having clinical trials that are well prepared and with enough sample to get statistical information to generate evidence, it's the way to go. We are convinced about that. Thank you very much for your comment.
Okay, Dr. Viale, you have a few minutes. So we got a big audience, almost 200 participants. So here is a question on YouTube. Eda Chuto writes, how do you consider treating with dexamethasone when respiratory symptoms that merit hospitalization begin about day 7th to prevent uncontrolled inflammation?
Personally, my personal opinion is that dexamethasone represents a good resource for the treatment of severe condition, especially when we have clinical signs informing us about the evolution toward the upregulated inflammatory phase of the disease. I don't agree with the position of the most important ICU Scientific Society against the use of dexamethasone, because we have learned during our normal experience that that in the infectious disease in which the inflammation plays a significant role in the worst outcome of the disease. Think, for example, to tuberculosis, think to pneumocystis carini pneumonia, things to pneumococcal meningitis. The administration of dexamethasone change the phenotype of the disease. Moreover, it is an extremely cheap option. So why not? But unfortunately, we were not able to finish the study about dexamethasone, because we have a study with the finalized to compare tocilizumab with the pulse dosing of dexamethasone. But we enrolled a couple of patients because we arrived too late. But I think that the position about dexamethasone should be revised by scientific society.
Okay, great. There is another question. How was the relation or how was the interaction between the general physicians and the specialists, the infectologists, the pneumologists? What was the role of the general doctors?
The best lesson we learned from COVID and the best experience we had the opportunity to live is the collaboration between specialists. In the first day of the infection, the first day of pandemia in Bolonia, like every infectious disease, CoViD-19 was a disease in the hands of infectivologists. But within the first week, we realized that together is better, because without a pneumologist, without an intensivist, without a good and a skilled radiologist, you cannot treat perfectly this patient. This is the first lesson we learned. So we started to change the team of medical doctors managing this patient from an infectious disease team to a multifaceted team with pneumologist, with intensivist, with internal medicine specialist, with radiologist able to perform ecographic study of the lung, and we learned the advantage related to working together. In the second phase of the disease, when we realized that the involvement of general practitioners and the involvement of extra hospital medicine were strongly needed, we started to break the wall between hospital medicine and the community medicine. This is a very high wall in Italy. And we started to work together with general practitioners. We involved the general practitioner in the management of the patients. When the shortage of PPI was controlled, and when we were able to give PPI to practitioners, we started to work together. And we learned that also the very famous infectious disease specialist, Professor Viale, can learn a lot of things from the general practitioner working with him. It was a wonderful experience, and I think that after the pandemic, after the outbreak, we have the duty to build a new healthcare system with a higher interaction between community and hospital medicine. This is the best lesson we have learned.
So, in Mexico we have different system, but would you encourage the universal coverage in the Latin American countries, the universal health coverage?
Sorry, I had a bad reception. I don't. Can you write your question?
Would you encourage, promote the universal health systems in Latin America?
See, I don't know how the healthcare system works in Latin America, but COVID-19 is a disease of every physician. And moreover, the number of the disease was so high that at the end, in the worst days of the pandemic, also surgeons worked without the management of the patient. But what I want to stress is the value of practitioners, is the value of case tracing of the patient catching at home in the early stage of the disease, because it can change the evolution of the disease.
Okay, there is another question. And what was the role of the medical students in Italy facing this?
Medical students?
Yeah.
We have thank you very much for this question, because we have a very nice experience with our medical students. Because when the pandemic starts on March 3, schools were closed from primary school to university school, and we start to perform our lessons to students by webinar. But a lot of students asked us to attend the COVID engagement, the COVID war. And a lot of students went to hospitals asking to help us. And we used them in back office, obviously, using them for database compilation and for the on-call follow-up of patients. Okay. Every patient evaluated in the checkpoint of the ID and released at home were checked every day by students on call. And for them, this was a fantastic opportunity. The better lesson they could have during the COVID period. So a very exciting experience for our students, I think. They were extremely motivated. In fact, now that we are going toward the national exam for admission to specialty school, we have a lot of vocations for infectious disease specialization because they were absolutely involved.
Great. Okay, well, this is our first international webinar, and it was a very great experience to have you here. We are very thankful. We want to say thank you to Dr. Simon Kawa, Director of the National Institute, the Ambassador Luigi De Chiara, the engineer Bernardo Aguilar Calvo, and the Conciliar Maria Teresa Aceron, and of course the Professor Pierluigi Viale for this lecture, for this opportunity to share your experience. And we're very thankful, and we hope this is the first but not the last chance we could share these kind of experiences. So we hope that the scientific community from Italy and Mexico can join together to share not only experience, but perhaps the opportunity to begin work working together in creating projects, protocols. So this could be the first step toward that mission.
Thank you very much. We need your experience, absolutely. We need to try to share experience with you. And my hope is to have another opportunity to talk about COVID-19 with the Mexican doctors, possibly face to face.
Of course.
For example, in Acapulco.
You're very welcome. Absolutely. So we share.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the audience to be here. So the lecture is going to be in our social media. It's going to be on YouTube, on Facebook, so you can reach it. You can watch it if you weren't, if you didn't have the chance to be alive. You have it there. So thank you and goodbye to Italy.
Bye. Thank you.